In 2011, Tim Cook became Apple's CEO, and it's now official. Almost exactly 15 years later, on September 1st, Tim Cook is stepping down as CEO, and John Ternus, Senior Vice President of Hardware Engineering, will become Apple's new CEO. You've seen John Ternus in tons of keynotes, from the Apple Silicon transition all the way up to the in-person MacBook Neo event just a few months ago. He's done interviews with MKBHD talking about Apple device reliability, but he's actually been at Apple working on the hardware of some of the most iconic products for the past 25 years. So what does this transition mean for Apple? Is John Ternus going to bring a new era that's more like Steve Jobs, or continue the services-focused type leadership that Tim Cook has brought? Well, if we take a look at the products John Ternus has already worked on at Apple over the last 2 decades, I'm pretty optimistic about the future. John Ternus holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Pennsylvania, and his senior capstone was actually an accessibility product. He made a mechanical feeding arm operable by head movements to help people with quadriplegia. I find it interesting that his work on accessibility started even long before he was at Apple. More on that in a second. His first job was at Virtual Research Systems designing VR headsets. Yes, even 25 years before the Apple Vision Pro. But in July 2001, he joined Apple's product design team. Once he joined Apple, Ternus first worked on Apple's displays, like the old Cinema display. Bloomberg reports that John Ternus really cut his teeth at Apple building those displays. And I actually just saw someone recently share on social media that their old Cinema display still works and is great. That speaks to hardware engineering. And after 6 years working on monitors and displays, Apple moved him to something bigger. According to Bloomberg, John Ternus has been working on the iPad since the original model. Ternus oversaw the product design, was there for the earliest prototypes, and you can see on Apple's leadership page that Ternus has overseen the hardware engineering on new product lines like iPad and the AirPods, plus many generations of Macs, Apple Watch, and iPhone. Say what you want about the iPad, but when it comes to hardware engineering, this is still one of the most incredible products Apple makes. Remember, there's an entire M5 chip and full computer in this device. And John Ternus has led the teams building the iPad from the original up until now. Then in 2013, he was promoted to VP of Hardware Engineering under Dan Riccio, and then he added AirPods and the Mac under his purview. And apparently Ternus and his team handled the design and engineering of AirPods from day one. I recently did a video on Apple's 50th anniversary and said AirPods are probably one of the most just worked products Apple has right now. They're reliable, they sound great, noise canceling is excellent, and you see them everywhere. And what's interesting is AirPods actually received FDA clearance to be clinical grade hearing aids. I think that goes back to John Ternus' senior capstone at University of Pennsylvania, where he built a robotic arm for accessibility. And now with AirPods getting FDA clearance for hearing aids and John Ternus' team being responsible for that, you can see the through line all the way from his senior capstone to AirPods Pro today. And not only did Ternus oversee the iPad lineup and AirPods, but now overseeing the Mac, he spearheaded the Apple Silicon transition from the M1 chip in the original MacBook Pro, Air, and Mac Mini, all the way to now where we have the M5 chip in the Mac Studio and iPad Pro. He was the one in the November 2020 keynote that announced the transition. And over the years, he introduced new product lines like the Mac Studio. He was the last person to announce a new Mac Pro. And while it's easy to overlook, that architecture shift was seamless, it was on time, and not only did it make Apple products more powerful, but now it's allowed Apple to make products like the MacBook Neo running on an iPhone chip. And John Ternus was actually at a physical event when the MacBook Neo was announced, allowing Apple to serve the entire product lineup from the high-end Mac Studio all the way down to the MacBook Neo. And side note, the other person responsible for Apple Silicon, Johny Srouji, has now been elevated to Apple's Chief Hardware Officer. He's who you see in the basement whenever he's talking about a new Apple chip. Maybe he'll get an office now with a view. And despite Mark Gurman saying that Johny Srouji might have been on his way out, he's apparently going to be around now as the Chief Hardware Officer. Then in 2020, John Ternus took over iPhone engineering. And just think about all the iPhones that have been introduced from 2020 till now. The redesign of the iPhone 12 with the flat edge sides and MagSafe, the iPhone 14 Pro which brought the dynamic island, iPhone 15 with USB-C, all the way up till today, the iPhone 17 Pro, which I've been seeing everywhere, and that new orange color a lot of people like. All of those iPhone models were developed under John Ternus and his leadership. And the iPhone Air, which I do see get a lot of love online, he made the introduction during that keynote. We also got the new C1X chip and the new N1 chips, Apple Silicon for wireless connectivity, and in 2022, Apple Watch and even Apple Vision Pro hardware engineering has been brought under Ternus. So a lot of us on the customer side, we see the Apple Silicon, we see the hardware, we can enjoy the devices, but Ternus has done a lot of work behind the scenes, especially on reliability and durability. In this interview with MKBHD, you can hear John Ternus speak about his desire to make products that are great for the user, that last a long time, but are increased in repairability. And if you follow iFixit, you can see that Apple has been getting better on repairability for a lot of their devices, plus the self-service repair program, but also durability, like with Ceramic Shield 2. I've dropped my phone multiple times, and while there's tiny little scratches on it, I've not had it shatter. And I've seen a lot of other people drop lots of Apple devices, even in my own family, and their durability and reliability are incredible. So when it comes to the future of Apple products and hardware engineering, I'm very optimistic. Having John Ternus at the helm, also as new product categories are on the horizon, maybe augmented reality glasses, the iPhone Fold is rumored to even come out this year. Having a true engineer who cares about the hardware of products as the CEO of Apple, I think is a good thing. And Mark Gurman over at Bloomberg has actually gotten some quotes from people at Apple right now who have remained anonymous, but they say Ternus is highly technical, often drilling into tiny details in meetings. Another Apple exec called Ternus a real engineer, and former Apple engineers describe him as an executive who most closely embodies the engineering-first culture that Steve Jobs championed. Now, I've talked on my podcast, Primary Technology with Jason Aten, you can subscribe above, link below as well, that the next Apple CEO needed to be a product person, someone who understands the products intimately, how customers use them, and be able to innovate for the next decade or two. Also, side note, John Ternus is the age now, 51, that Tim Cook was when he took over. So if Tim Cook was there for 15 years, I think we have at least a decade and a half of John Ternus at the helm. Now, when Tim Cook took over in 2011, he had massive shoes to fill. Who could come after Steve Jobs? And if you look at the numbers, Tim Cook actually succeeded. He continued to help Apple grow to the company it is today, becoming one of the most profitable ever. And during that time, he did allow people like John Ternus to make incredible hardware. But I'm excited for this next phase of Apple and seeing them really push forward in engineering, maybe new hardware, new product categories. And of the major CEOs at Apple, if Steve Jobs was the genius innovator and Tim Cook was the shrewd businessman, I think John Ternus is closer to that product CEO that Steve Jobs was, and he's clearly a master engineer. Now, what remains to be seen is Apple has been behind in artificial intelligence, obviously the voice assistant. They have the deal with Google where Gemini will power the voice assistant very soon, probably this September. But again, having a younger CEO coming in right now, and I think we're still early in where AI fits, where it finds its feet, and what apps and services are useful, I'm bullish that John Ternus will figure out what to do with it going forward. So that means this WWDC in June, Tim Cook will be CEO, but for the next iPhone launch, whatever the iPhone 18 Pro and maybe iPhone Fold, that device will be announced by CEO John Ternus, who becomes the CEO September 1st. And to keep following along with all the Apple news and tips on how to use your Apple devices, hit that subscribe and like button below. I'll put my video on Apple's first 50 years right up here. And if you're interested in some Mac tips, maybe you just got a MacBook Neo, I'll put my video right here talking about Spotlight, did a whole masterclass on that, and a bunch of tips to make the most of your Apple devices. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time.